Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Pitts, and I will be your professor for the Strategic Management Capstone course that you're taking this semester. I wanted to spend a few moments in this initial lecture just to lay out, sort of, at least conceptually and theoretically, where we're heading in the course and talk a bit about what strategy is, what strategy isn't, and maybe why it's the capstone. The easy answer to that last question is because people and companies are pretty much often bad at it. Not because they're not smart, but because it's incredibly difficult. And to sort of emphasize the point, let me show an example of iconic leaders of the last century. Those of you old enough to remember pre-streaming and heck, even pre-delivery DVDs, we all went to Blockbuster. Kodak processed all our film and was one of the country's largest employers. Xerox had the market cornered on copiers. Sears was one of the largest retailers, if not the largest retailer, for quite some time, and were incredibly innovative with their catalog. Who uses a catalog anymore? Back to Kodak, after a century of being in operation, and again, one of the largest employers in the country, their last year of sales growth was 2004, the year Facebook was founded. Obviously, there was a sea change in the industry, and Kodak missed it. And to dive more into the story of Kodak, you'll see that they had opportunities to get in front of it. And just for whatever reason, and usually that reason is previous success, didn't see the threat until it was too late. Facebook in 2012, when it went public, were 5 times less than it is today, and that's a pretty recent number. Even despite the COVID downturn of the market briefly, a massive 8-year increase in value in market share. And the foundation of our education, this is where I'm going to spend some time in this course. It's in the MBA course when I took it, or the MBA program when I took it, the business education when I studied it was very different than it is today, and it's built on blue chip sort of traditional business models like Kodak, which no longer exist. And here is the key, or at least if they exist, they're shells of their former selves. And here's the key statistic: only 11% of the companies in the Fortune 500, back when it was initially established in 1955, still remain on the list today. 11%. This is despite every conceivable advantage in the marketplace, right? They've got all the money. They've got the best technology, the best engineering. They've got the smartest employees and the most talented managers. And probably a lot of them even cornered markets or had exclusive access to resources and capabilities. Despite all of that, only 11% of these companies remained on the list. This is an incredibly hard strategy, is an incredibly hard thing to perfect. So the business reality now is that these FANG companies, as they're called in the finance parlance, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, these companies that really drive the financiers a little nuts based on valuation, because the traditional models of profit and revenues don't lie as they used to. You recognize this. The marketplace today looks a lot less like this and a lot more like this. Facebook alone, 136,000 photos uploaded every minute. 293 updates shared every minute, and over 4 million likes per minute. Crazy the amount of traffic, crazy the amount of data that is available to Facebook. And the value of that data right now is evaluated at $18 billion in revenue. Pretty difficult to put a valuation on that, which is part of the challenge. But this is truly one of the... So if Facebook's data is worth 18 billion, how much is, and they've got, my challenge would be how much is Google's worth? Facebook's got your sort of your personal secrets and a little bit of your social circle, but Google has your search history. They know what you're really looking at. What's more valuable, the face you put on or what you do when no one's looking? Which data is worth more? Or better yet, what's Amazon's data worth? If Facebook has your public face and Google has your private face, well, Amazon's got your what you're spending money on. So I'll leave it to you to decide which is more valuable. But are these are the companies that are leading, obviously, the charge in this next century. That strategists are really struggling to figure out how to compete in marketplaces where they are currently occupied. The other reason, in my view, that we have strategy at the end, most programs have it at the end as the capstone, is because it really speaks to what employers in today's marketplace are looking for. You've spent your program developing a great deal of literacy around specific topics: finance, accounting, information technology, human resources, marketing, economics, whatever it is. And some of you may really have found a love and a niche for those specific areas and can build a career around it. What strategy asks you to do is take all of those skills, take all of that literacy and knowledge, and start to employ it in the service of much larger, broader, more complex problems that don't have a right or a wrong answer. And these FANG companies in particular, but companies in general now, with as much as the marketplace is changing, are looking less and less at graduates who have perfect 4.0s and have mastered all of the skills, and much more at what they've accomplished, what they've achieved, what they can build, what they can do. So they're looking less at tech's real world solutions. So we try to give you experiences through, and maybe some of you, probably a lot of you work. We offer our students internships, but we also encourage in our strategy course we insist upon a strategic analysis project where we embed our students within a company to try to achieve a strategic outcome. And that's something that really, again, speaks to what you can do and what you've accomplished. There's also a recognition that the teams are important in the modern workplace. Why? Because, again, these problems are so complex that it really requires diverse skill sets to get the job done. And so our classroom settings and our universities are looking less and more like this. I don't need to tell you that, because if you've been in a business school at all recently, you know you've spent a ton of time in teams, working in teams, which can be difficult, but again, it's a recognition of what the marketplace is looking for. 21st century tasks, projects are not the same as they were in the 20th century. The 20th century had a lot of opportunities for contingent sort of if-then problem solution approaches. We give some incentive to increase performance, kind of traditional management stuff. The 21st century problems aren't like that. Solutions oftentimes are surprising. The path forward towards a solution is opaque. And it really requires groups of people coming together, again, with diverse skill sets that complement one another to get there. And it's a challenge strategically for our organizations to properly incentivize that team behavior. Most don't do it well versus individual behavior. And a recognition of this Tuckman model of teamwork that's on the screen now. You've probably come in contact with this in an organizational behavior class or something similar in the past. But a recognition, and this is difficult for organizations, that teamwork takes time, that there's a process of the teams forming and then working out their differences in the storming phase, getting to the norming part of the process where we establish best practices, and finally, after a period of time, and it can be upwards of 6 months before the team is really a high-performing team. So again, to be able to do the key tasks in strategy, which we'll get to in a second, about reversing assumptions and some other, and looking at things very differently and taking in new information. It requires more people with complementary skills. Okay, so what is strategy? I want to kind of conclude this brief lecture with a discussion that won't be all encompassing, but we'll get to the key aspects of what strategy is. It really asks 4 essential questions, which I'll get to in a second. But again, taking those skills and that literacy that you've developed through the program that you've been in, the business program so far, strategy, the challenge of strategy is to get you to think broadly. It's to apply all of the skills that you've developed to these really complex problems that have high stakes and not a lot of easy answers. In fact, very few easy answers. The other thing I will say before I get to the 4 essential questions is that it's important through this course to kind of wear the hat, at least imagine wearing the hat of a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar organization. A lot of the concepts we discuss, vertical integration, unrelated diversification, international strategy, these are concepts that we have to get away from if we're an entrepreneur or a small business. That sort of scarcity mindset, we have to put on that CEO hat of a large organization, because we have the resources to do almost anything we want. So the question isn't what we can say yes to, it's what we choose to say no to. That's the real issue. So 4 essential questions for strategy. Number 1, where do we compete? Geographically, where do we compete? What industries do we compete in? What markets do we compete in? And we'll expand this discussion later as we talk about transaction cost economics. Do we make it? Do we buy it? Do we outsource it? Where do we compete? Second, what unique value do we bring? Why do customers choose us? You've heard the term undoubtedly in your marketing class, the customer value proposition. What is that value proposition that we provide to consumers in the marketplace? Do we have differentiated products, features, services? Do we compete on cost? These same questions that you answered in your marketing class apply here. What resources and capabilities do we utilize? A very important question. This is an aspect where we can not only expand into different markets, but also provide advantage or gain advantage in the marketplace. And we'll spend a lot of time in this class on resources and capabilities. And then finally, how do we sustain our competitive advantage? The 3-word key phrase in strategy is sustainable competitive advantage. It's one thing to find a brief advantage in the marketplace. It's another thing to sustain it long term. We will talk about a lot of ways that can happen through network effects, through exclusive access to resources or capabilities, through customer switching costs. There are a lot of ways to sustain competitive advantage. And that is ultimately the goal of strategy. And then briefly, as I conclude, so that's what strategy is. How does it get done? Anybody who's been a part of a strategic planning process probably has some stories to share, which I'm excited to hear. If you've sat at a board of directors of a nonprofit organization, or if you've been a part of a strategic planning process in your own company, there's good and bad. The real roles and responsibilities, let's acknowledge what those are, and then talk about what unfortunately can happen. Important distinction: the board of directors, in concert with the CEO, is responsible for crafting the strategic direction for the organization. So strategy really comes from the board of directors. It gets executed by the CEO and the CEO's team. So the CEO is responsible for execution, the board for development of strategy. if you've been through again that process of strategic planning in the past, unfortunately, it's really been misrepresented in the marketplace what strategy really ought to be about. It's really been misrepresented by a strategic planning process that has codified what an organization is already doing or already planning to do. Everyone in a board retreat comes together and write it all up and put it into a plan, and a lot of self-congratulatory pats on the back, and then that plan promptly sits in a file cabinet somewhere and collects dust until the next year when you look at it again. That's not the way strategy ought to happen. Strategy should be a much more ruthless view of the company, even when going well. And we'll provide some examples of companies like Netflix throughout this course that have done remarkably well at this. Never getting complacent, never assuming that the current business conditions are going to exist, and acknowledging trade-offs, acknowledging that, again, it's not, as I said before, a lack of opportunities or funds or resources to pursue opportunities. It's acknowledging that taking all the information you can in to make the best decision, and acknowledging that you've left something else on the table. You've zigged when you could have zagged, and then following that zig through, pursuing it as far as it can go, then coming back to the table, reassessing how you made that decision. Was it the right one? And what can you learn from the process? So if you were supposed to zag, next time you'll zag. Strategy is also a lot about challenging assumptions, and there's some links to innovation here in a second, but it's as I said previously, complacency kills often in these large organizations that have had a lot of success. And just assuming that the marketplace, the industry, the consumers, because they've been doing something and purchasing something and acting in such a way for the past 10, 20, 40 years does not mean that they will in the future. And without a really perceptive antennae out there for consumer preferences and industry changes and everything else sort of external to the company, things can really go awry quickly. So being able to challenge core assumptions at all times is an important part of strategy. And really, I'll say too that strategy comes back a lot of times to as an entrepreneur, you're looking at the customer and you're trying to fill a customer need and gather, get as many customers as you can to grow as quickly as you can. You're all about the focus on the customer. Then as the company grows, it becomes distracted sometimes by other, optimization functions and fancy, press and marketing campaigns and financing. Not that the customer is necessarily lost in the process, but sometimes can fall to a secondary or a tertiary priority. When you become a CEO then of a large corporation, when the company becomes huge again, it's funny how it comes back to the customer, and where is the customer need and desire taking the organization. And as I said before, links to innovation. So strategy and innovation are pretty well linked. Because of that, again, that approach that needs to have a mindset of challenging assumptions, the mindset of innovation, the mindset of not becoming complacent, the mindset of recognizing what's happening in the marketplace around you and in a macro environment above you. And here's some just interesting thoughts about innovation. Anybody who, if we were in a classroom setting, I'd play the Jetsons theme song and video for you. For those of you who remember the Jetsons, really was, I think it was created in the 60s, but really became a big popular show in the 80s. And it was all about flying cars and cars that would fold up into briefcases and just a really futuristic take. And so that's what we wanted. We wanted the flying cars, but instead we got Twitter with 140 characters, which, is a story in and of itself. But again, forward thinking, when we talk about blue ocean strategy, it'll be a lot about innovation and creating new marketplaces. So the last thing I want to leave this lecture with